So for people that don't know me, I'm Kevin. Last name's Cwalina. It's spelled with a C, and it always confuses people. It's Polish. My background is I worked as a theatrical set designer in New York for a long time, about 18 years, and then got into architecture. So now I work as not a registered architect, but I work under an architect and do project management for a firm in Charlottesville. All through this, I've been a woodworker. I think I really got into furniture making probably in about 2005-ish, is when I first started kind of going from rough carpentry and screws and putting things together and thinking about, for one, sharpening, but joinery and how do we do that sort of thing. And how do we make furniture joints versus just kind of slapping things together and holding for a period of time. And over that time, and you'll see I have like a couple different things here that I've used over the years, because I've changed the way that I've sharpened over the years, both from learning new techniques and also just because of where I was living at the time. When I first started out, I was in North Carolina in Asheville, and this was my first grinder that I had. It's under $100, and that was a great thing. Eventually, I was in New York City in a small apartment where I had my bench, which was smaller than this, and my bed. So having this blow sparks into my bed wasn't the best idea. So I bought a Tormac because I could put that on my kitchen counter and sharpen tools and then go back to the bench. So a lot of this is, I think a lot of people, they feel like, oh, I don't have all the stuff to get started. As long as you have a desire, there's a way to do it. And you can kind of play with different techniques to get stuff sharp. So because as you'll see as we get through this, it's not that complicated. People like Leonard Lee, and I did bring 2 books that have kind of how I learned how to sharpen. Leonard Lee's book is really what I learned from originally, and then Chris Wertz's book recently I just bought when I was doing this because I was like, I'd probably read that because I knew that some people would have read it. But anyway, so to start out, the first part about sharpening is to ask yourself, what is sharp? And this is directly out of Leonard Lee's book, where he gets in there, and I love his analogy at first because he starts talking about, in the history of mankind, people talked about as sharp as a serpent's tooth, and that's like how you measure sharpness. And then later, as serpents became out of favor, sharp as a tack became a way of talking about sharpness. Today, people talk about sharp as a razor, and even in conversations outside of woodworking, people talk about sharp as a razor. And that's what Leonard Lee in his book used as a benchmark to gauge sharpening. For him, he had a university at hand with an electron microscope. So he was taking razor blades, gold plating them so that they would show up on the electron microscope, and then looking at how sharp is this razor, and then with my water stones, I can get that actually sharper than a razor. So he was proving a point. None of us have, I'm assuming no one has an electron microscope or the ability to gold plate your tools. So that's not really a useful way of thinking about sharpening. In Chris's book, he talks about a zero radius intersection, and that's kind of what I was trying to illustrate in some of these pictures, is that a zero radius intersection, 2 planes come together, very simple. And then eventually what happens as you dull your chisels, I pulled some of this stuff out of some planes that were sitting around that were given to me, where it's like you can see the radius on some of these things. And that's what's going to happen. As we use our tools, they're going to get dull. So in terms of thinking about like what is sharp, for the purpose of this, we'll use zero radius intersection since we don't have an electron microscope. So then the next thing, so once you define what sharp is, the next question would be, how do we measure the sharpness of a tool? The electron microscope we've talked about. Some people will like take a plain blade and they'll like to shave their arm hair to like prove, you know, like, oh, this is really sharp. But you can nick yourself. It doesn't really prove anything. So it's not really a good measure. Some people will take the plain blade and try to cut a piece of paper. I've done that. I do it with my axes all the time because I sharpen my axes way too sharp to be useful as an axe. But you know, then it's like, oh yeah, that's cool. Not useful again, and it actually dulls the tool. You can take the one that's useful is you can take the tool and just kind of run it across the back of your thumb, and you can feel the ridges on there, and it's kind of, you can see if it's actually got a nick or something in it. That's one way that you could, most of these are all sharp, but you could do that. Another, if you do have a zero radius intersection on your tool, the interesting thing about it is that it doesn't reflect light. So if something's really sharp, I don't know if I have anything really sharp in here. Maybe I brought in some really cheesy tools to demo. Oh, perfect. There you go. I don't know if you can, yours isn't dull enough to see the edge. But you get a really dull one, but on a really dull one like this, you can see the edge on there. And then on something that's sharp, when you actually look at it, you won't see any light reflecting on there because there's no physical surface for it to reflect off of. So that's a good way, just as you pick something up and you see it and you're like, whoa, that's, I know that's not sharp. And then the ultimate really is just using the tool. You're working, you're putting a lot of extra effort into cutting something, and you're like, oh, I'm really pushing on this thing. Clearly it's dull. And then what some people will do, if you just have a block of wood, you can take it and just try to, like, this one's definitely dull. So like trying to pair end grain, you know, it's not, that's not even cut it. Where something that's sharp, you'll be able to get in there and be able to pair that end grain easily without having to like push a lot into it. And that's, to me, a far better way of thinking about sharpness, because that's how you're using the tool, and how much effort you're putting into it for that. So even this junky, I don't even know what this is. It's probably from Harbor Freight, because I think this was one that my dad gave me. But even junky tools you can sharpen. The steel may be, it might not hold an edge that long. You can still sharpen them and have them be good tools. So even if you don't have enough money for some fancy chisel set, you can still make them work, and you can do work with them. So that's what is sharpness. That is how we can gauge how sharp this thing is. And then the next part of this is angles. And angles is a whole conversation, and people can nerd out on the angles, but the big thing I think to take away on angles is how you want to use the tool. I think the easiest way of thinking about it, I can't remember if it was Leonard Lee or Chris that talks about this, but they talk about, you know, you use an axe, a felling axe, and a splitting axe. I think everyone has used those before. So a felling axe is going to have a really narrow angle because you're slicing and cutting fibers. A splitting axe is going to be a really wide angle because you're working on the end grain and you're pulling the thing apart.
Screws it up the felling.
Oh, that's a nice one.
And here's a split next.
I like it. Yeah, there you go. Now we're just nerding out on the axes. Yeah, and the other way to think about it too is a paring chisel. You're not striking it with a mallet. A paring chisel, you're just going to use your body weight and just be working on that. Mortise chisel, you're going to put that thing in there. You're going to wham on it with a mallet, and that's actually where the geometry of a mortise, a true mortise chisel, is going to be different. So you might want different angles for those two types of chisels or plane blades, just depending on what you're doing with them. for me, I'm an amateur and I'm often tasked to do all sorts of weird tasks. Like I was telling some people about fixing an IKEA table the other day. So I just keep everything in the neighborhood of 25 to 35 degrees. And that's kind of where I just call it a day. I don't nerd out about having different angles. I could see somebody, maybe if you're like, I'm going to spend a half a year and I'm going to make high boys out of maple, and for some reason you want to change the geometry. But to me, I'm not working on any one type of wood long enough to warrant changing the angles of my tools.
Right, so for, just as an example, in a chip carving knife, you use a 10-degree bevel. Because you are inserting it into the wood, and you want to reduce the friction as much as you can. So you grind it or you sharpen it at a 10-degree bevel instead of a 20 and 25.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for this, really, I'm just talking about plane blades and chisels. For other tools, I might do something different. And this is just kind of a general rule of thumb for that. And then you can, obviously deviate from it, knowing what you're wanting to do with it.
Is there a difference in durability between different angles?
Certainly. And that's a good point.
Repeat the question for Matt, who's on the.
Oh, sure. The question was about durability and angles. So as you, and this gets a little bit into metallurgy, with all chisels, all tools, people are trying to strike a balance between being able to have the tool be sharp and have the metal not deform, but also not having it be brittle and crack. So they strike a balance with a lot of these steels in creating the tool. So with that said, as it gets thinner, as you're making a narrower and narrower angle on your chisels, it will slice a lot better. But the disadvantage to that is that your edge is going to be more susceptible to being chipped and dull a little quicker. So that's why I like on the mortise chisels, where you're just putting that thing straight into the wood and hitting it with a mallet. You might not want to have a really steep angle on there because you can dull that. Even the fibers of the wood, as that's going through like a piece of oak, there's parts of that are softer and harder in there, and they can, on a really fine blade, kind of chip that. Especially on these junky ones, these things chip all over the place.
So if you chop a lot of dovetails, you see that really fast. If you're like chopping those walnut pieces that have the curly hard base to the door sides, right? So chopping those dovetails, like a chisel that's got really good steel, you can get through, 3 or 4 sides, and one that's thin steel, you get through 1 or 2, and it starts to chip and break off, and you can feel it, like just see it right when it starts to chip off.
And almost like molds to the piece of wood.
Yeah,
I mean, it's literally what's happening. It's a die almost that you're whamming it into there. So on chisels and plane blades, geometry wise, I mean, this is pretty obvious. The back is flat, and then we have a bevel angle going down to it. So pointing out the obvious, but and then we're meeting at the 0 radius angle. So one last thing on angles too is that the actual angle, like I say 25 degrees, but it doesn't really matter. Like if you're 26 or you're 24, to me, the biggest thing that matters is repeatability with all that. The worst, and when I was first starting out, the thing that I always struggled with is I had a hard time getting that in. I didn't have gauges at the time or to work with. So I'd grind something on this grinder and it'd be slightly off, and I'm like, I just took off way too, I didn't get it in the center when I was grinding it, and then I took off too much material, it'd be over here, it took forever. So to me, what I like to do is I set up gauges, and I'll show you this one, that allow you to be repeatable each time. So this has numbers on it, 25, 30, 35. I don't know if that really, I know when I made this, I tried to do that. If it is, I don't know, but it doesn't really matter to me, because when I go back to the stop block, it's always that angle. So I know that these are the two, and really it's only that matters on this. I don't use any of the other ones. So I actually don't use this whole thing, which is the point. But I saw this, I think Lee Nielsen had this at a demo at one point, and I was like, I'll make one of those when I get home. And I kind of was like, this is rubbish, it's not working. And I'll talk about that when we get into that part of it. But repeatability is the important thing. So then, does that all make sense so far? Sometimes I talk really fast. My boss was complaining about this today when he was trying to get a word in. Abrasives. So I brought in a couple. Mostly what I use today are diamond stones. So it's a piece of steel that has industrial diamonds laminated onto it. They also come in this type of variety, which is a little bit cheaper because you can imagine it's half the amount of diamonds, but it works just as well. These cut a little bit faster. I think these are DMT makes these. I can't remember. Die Sharp.
Yes.
DMT. I started out with Japanese water stones. They're not that much money, and they cut really fast. I guess I should go back one step. The diamond stones, and one of the things I like about them is that they don't dish. So you can be kind of bad to these stones, and it doesn't. It won't hurt you that much. They do cost a lot of money, so there is a lot of investment in them. So you don't want to abuse them. But with something like a Japanese water stone, this cuts really fast, and it's a great stone. The only disadvantage is as you cut on this, you start to dish the center of the stone. So you'll have people talking about patterns on here. So it's like I do a little bit up here, and then I go down here, and I do a little bit here, and you try to wear the stone evenly. There's people that have, I think it was Garrett Hack that I saw do it, where he's got like a figure 8 pattern that he does on it. It is amazing what he's doing, and I'm like, I don't know how you hold that thing straight and do this amazing figure 8 at the same time. The only issue I've ever had with these is just that I had to keep them flat. So I eventually had to buy a diamond stone to go with this, to be able to take this stone to this stone and flatten it. So these are great. I kind of miss them, but I just use these anymore. But I remember it was good times with the Japanese water stone. You do soak these in water before you use them and kind of fully load them. You can see one of the other disadvantages on here. If you notice, there's scratches on here. If you are using a blade and you hit it, you can nick your stone. So like if you're trying to sharpen knives or something like that might dig into your stone, these might not be a great idea because you can nick it, and then you really have to go over here and flatten it to get that nick out. Otherwise that nick is transferring, just like the oak is transferring to your edge, your tool, it's transferring the same thing. So you can't get it flat. You don't have a reference surface. When I was in college, I didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't have a lot of money for X-Acto blades. So I used to resharpen my X-Acto blades. Sounds stupid. And I also didn't have a sharpening setup either. I had heard, this before the internet. So I just heard someone say like, oh, I know you can sharpen with ceramic stones. And I was like, I don't have a ceramic stone, but I got a coffee mug. So I would take my coffee mug, flip it over to the one little ring of unglazed section of the mug, and try to sharpen my blade, and it didn't really work well. You gotta change the geometry, because what happens on those, the tip breaks off, but you could get it a little bit sharper and you get through a couple more sheets of mat board. But anyway, the point there being ceramic are real stones. You don't have to use a coffee mug, and they're great for things like knives. Do you use them for your chip knives? That's what I've heard about.
Yes, a lot of chip carvers do, and I have a set, and they don't dish either, and you just wash them with some soapy water and they clean right up.
Yeah, and they're pretty, they're like beautiful white or gray. And, I haven't used them, but that's where I've heard of people using them. Is you can get like a smaller one
Right.
and then hold them with your knives, and sharpen that way. And it's really about not dishing or chipping into that stone. What else do we have here? Sandpaper. I haven't used a lot of sandpaper, but if you want to use sandpaper, it's all about the backing surface. And I meant to bring a sheet of glass in, but I mean, I think you can imagine a sheet of glass. Typically it's called float glass. I mean, almost all glass nowadays is float glass. We don't really have too many wavy window glasses anymore. So if you get a piece of tempered glass and you put a sheet of paper, sandpaper on it, wet sandpaper, it's great for flattening the bottoms of your plane blades where you don't want to, you know, you're spending $100 on a stone. Do you want to sharpen, like spend a half a day flattening the sole of your plane blade on your beautiful stone that costs a lot of money? Maybe not. Sandpaper might be a little bit of cheaper option for that. You can also get a piece of granite. If there's a countertop store nearby, you might be able to get one of the cutouts from a sink. And then you just put your sandpaper on that. That's a little bit cheaper way to do it. Diamond stone, sandpaper, Japanese stones. Chris points out in his book, cinder blocks. A carpenter is at a job site that he had seen, you know, just sharpening a tool on a cinder block, which gets into a point about what sharpness is, because technically you can sharpen on anything. You could sharpen on anything that's going to abrade a piece of metal. And the cinder block, really what it's doing, it's sharpening on all those high points. Like if you imagine, you know, your piece of steel going across and you have all these pits, you know, where it's hitting and it's hitting the top of that cinder block, those are sharp, but then you have all these little pits in there that aren't sharp. So it's like a horrible serrated knife, but it is a way of, you could still cut yourself on it, I think is the point, is that it's, you don't have to have some really expensive fancy setup, is I think the point there. So those are abrasives, and there's more. I'm sure that I'm leaving out some. I think there's like abrasive dusts or something. Do you know about these?
Diamond paste.
Is that what it is? Like you put it on a plate or something?
Yeah.
I don't know much about these.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
I use diamond also, but I only use one grit.
Oh, okay.
And then I have a metal plate, it's called a lapping plate. And I put on this 3 micron diamond compound
Oh, okay.
on the lapping plate. And that I use for holding.
Is that like a paste or is it a? Oh,
I
okay.
use very little,
Ah,
like a grain of rice and then some WD-40. And then I use that same diamond compound on just a block of maple block.
mhm.
That's been plain flat. And so the 3 micron diamond compound, same compound on both, but you get a higher degree of polish on the maple because it's soft.
Oh, okay.
Works really nice.
Oh, that's cool.
It's a real simple system.
What's the diamond grit on your stone?
600. And that's just for turning work. That's all I do with stone work.
Okay. So there's a lot of different things that you could do. And I think Chris tries to make a point of like, whatever you do, I did not follow his advice at all because his book came out much later, but you know, he says like, pick a system and stick with it. So clearly I have not done that. I have shifted all over the place and I continue to, I think I'm sticking with this at this point. But anyway, even in kind of doing a little research for this talk, I kind of changed a couple of the things that I'm doing with it.
Well, the technology's changed. When you were in college, those diamond stones probably weren't on the market.
Yeah, and I definitely would not have been, I was sharpening with a coffee cup, so I wouldn't have been. I could have bought all the razor blades I needed.
I will put a plug in on those diamonds, the steel back diamond stones, the DMT ones. There is a website, I think it's called like sharpeningstone.com or sharpening.com. And they are considerably cheaper than any other supplier, than Rockler, Lee Valley, all of them. I think my set over there under that leather cover, I think I paid like $180 for the whole set.
I wish I knew about that
Yeah.
then.
Well,
Share that group.
Oh, yeah, I'll post a link in the group. Yeah, it's basically a supply warehouse and all they sell is sharpening supplies.
Oh, that's great.
Just a expensive lesson. I had water stones,
Uh,
didn't use them for a couple years, but had left them stored in water.
yeah.
Shop that was not climate controlled.
Uh-huh.
When they
The
broke,
breeze,
I lost it all, they broke.
that's too bad.
Yeah.
So next, kind of talking about like actually doing the process. So, and I'm stealing this from Chris's book on this one because he laid it out pretty nicely in there. He talked about grinding, honing, and polishing as being 3 stages of this, which I think is good. As I was saying earlier, when I first started out, I didn't have a gauge, so I was kind of freehand sharpening everything. But I did use a grinder, and the thing about a grinder, I mean, if you've ground, you know this, but if you haven't, it's a circular wheel, so it's going to put what we call a hollow grind on your tool. I think in this, you know, you get arc on this instead of a straight line coming across. There's a slight hollow grind to that face, and that is important for one big reason when you're trying to do. I thought I was going to bring one. I think I did. Yeah, we can grind one later and we'll show it. But the main reason for that is you have 2 points of reference. When you put this chisel down on your stone and you're trying to do this freehand, you can actually, when it's not hollow ground, it kind of moves up and down. When you have a hollow ground, you just have 2 points of reference and you can kind of put it down on the bottom one, move it up to the front, and it clicks into place. And then from there, you can start moving on your stone. And you actually can kind of control it a little bit better. And this is how I learned is just freehanding it on these, well, on this stone in particular, but yeah, it's harder without that hollow grind, but we'll be putting one on there, and then you can go back and forth on that. So
the hollow grind also gives you a lot less material to have to sharpen.
Exactly.
Speeds things up a lot.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that you see. I don't know if any of you have seen like a Japanese chisel. They have the steel is typically a lot hardened. So it's harder to sharpen because the steel is so hardened. So what they'll do on those behind the bevel, there'll be a little hollow in there. So when you're sharpening, you're actually not sharpening in that hollow. You're sharpening all around that hollow. So there's less material to remove for the same reason of this hollow grind on the front. So the grinding can be used to put a hollow grind on there for doing freehand sharpening. It can also be used to change the angle. So a lot of times you get this at a flea market and you're like, that's been used as a scraper. So like I want to put a real angle on that. You're going to go to the grinder to start that. Or, you know, if you don't have money for a grinder, although they are pretty cheap compared to the stones, the really coarse diamond stones can also work as a grinder to cut that fast. And with a gauge, you can go ahead and cut. You can use it as a grinder, basically, manual grinder. But I do recommend getting a real grinder for that.
Just like keeping your bed sheets nearby.
What's that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was a weird time. So my girlfriend's still with me, but the first time she stayed over at my apartment in New York, she was questioning why there was a box under the bed called axes. And I was like, don't worry, those are all made by like Swedish blacksmiths. Like I would never use those on a person. If you see me with something that looks like it's painted blue and it looks like it came from Lowe's, you know, that would be the time that'd be questionable. Problems Carlson, no, don't worry about that. So grinding, so the other reason for it is changing the shape of the tool, removing damage from a tool. You drop this, it's hit an edge, you got a nick in there, you're gonna go to the grinder for that before you go to the honing. just to remove material rapidly is really what you're doing. It's also good, if you have a plain blade like this one, you'll notice on this one, the back of that actually has a bevel on it. Where someone's, I don't know what they've done to this, but they've tried to sharpen the back side. I don't think they knew how to sharpen the front side, so they turned it around. And it's like, oh, I'll take some off the back, and now you just ruined your flat reference surface. So what do you do with that? We'll show that in a bit, but you're gonna take it to the grinder over here, and we're just gonna put a flat top on there and put a whole new bevel on it. That's the fastest way to get past that, because there's nothing you can really do. You're not gonna mill down the entire blade to get to wherever that guy rounded over that thing. Or yes, anybody could have done it. I think actually my dad did this. Because I think this was his. But or maybe I did it as a kid, I don't know. So after we've ground it, the next stage is we're gonna go into honing. So in the honing stage, we're gonna put a secondary bevel on our tools, and that's what this is. So the first stage, we're getting our hollow grind, we're setting that at 25 degrees. That's great. And then what we're gonna do is come in with this secondary bevel. You could make it any degree you want. At this, what I'm doing here is 35 because I have a 25 and I have a 35. I thought about doing 30, but then I thought maybe it's not enough, and I might end up in a place. I don't know. I might go and try 30 as well, but 35 is what I'm trying right now. What's nice about this is from the other technique that I was showing earlier, where you're kind of nipping off the two points of contact. Now you're only nipping off at one. You can use a gauge to get that dialed in exactly. So it's very little material that's coming off there, and you can actually get that secondary bevel with just a couple swipes on these stones, and start to introduce a burr on there. So I'm kind. This is the thing that changed for me is I always did freehand sharpening, and when I got a bevel gauge, I set it the exact same way because that's just how I always sharpen. I sharpen by hand this way, so I got a gauge. So I'm like, oh, I got to set the gauge the same way I've been doing it by hand. And it never occurred to me, why not just go a little bit higher? And it's more repeatable. It's easier to hit that number. Because the problems I would have is I would try to set it exactly, and it'd be off just a little bit, and then I'd end up removing more material. I'd almost remove the entire hollow grind. Like I think on this one there's like a little tiny hollow grind right there that's left on that chisel, and then I'm like, well, that was a waste of time. I just removed a ton of material, shortened the life of the tool. It'll be fine, but it was a lot of my time that was getting wasted. So this is now what I do, and then from that honing, once you got that little secondary bevel, the next part is just polishing. And polishing is just moving up, just like you would when you're using sandpaper on a piece of wood. You're just going to finer and finer grades. And I put this one together because this is trying to illustrate the point. Like here's your cinder block, you know, with the grinder. You have very coarse grind on here, but there are some sharp points on here. And then what you're doing is you're just removing and Leonard Lee would probably have some microscope, you know, pictures in here showing the molecular levels of these things. So you can actually see what these look like, but you're basically just removing more and more of those chips as you go through sharpness. That makes your edge of your tool stronger. If you think about it, if you have all these little pits in the edge of your tool, each one of these pieces is weak. As you start to remove those, it becomes one mass, a piece of metal, and not without little chips in it. So it becomes stronger, and it will last a little longer before you need to resharpen. That's why you're kind of keep honing it and polishing it to get up to that. You never really get to here, as you can see in here. Even I don't know which one's the favorite blade, but there's still, under the electron microscope, there's still ridges to that. There's always going to be some level of that. And really all that matters is when you come back, how far do you have to take it? Do you have to take it of how much polishing, if you're cutting. And you're cutting end grain and you're not having to struggle to cut that, you're done. It works, it's good. You don't need to take it to some, they make like stones that go, especially the Japanese water stones. I think there's like a white one that like, I don't know the numbers. Numbers are bad with me, but there's one that's got lots of zeros in it that you can use and they sell to you, but I don't know that you need it. For me, I use these 4 and then I'm done. And really, this one, I'm not even really using that much anymore, but so it's really just kind of like honing and then 2 polishing stones. This really, I think of as a grinder, because this is the extra coarse one. I don't even know what that is.
It's like 100 grit or.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty aggressive. So like once I'm off of here, I don't really need to use this unless there's something wrong that I'm trying to address with it. So that's saying,
Do you feel you get a equivalent polish coming off your last diamond versus a waterstone?
no. Yeah, I think on this one, I think this probably is a higher, I don't know what it is. But
Like I have the extra fine TMT diamond plate. And I don't, they say it's 8,000, but it's not as polished as coming off my 8,000 waterstone.
yeah, well, I think one other thing about the water stones that happens is you develop a slurry.
Yeah.
On these, so as you're grinding on these, the abrasive abrades and it becomes a slurry of abrasive. So as you're cutting, it actually becomes finer when you use that slurry, especially on these this surface is the finer of that 2-part
That's
stone.
similar to the naked block with the diamond paste.
Yeah,
Is that the heavier, the larger particles of diamond paste get embedded in the naked block.
Mhm.
The smaller particles are on the surface. And you get a mirror polish. You can see the difference between the lapping plate with the same micron paste. So you can literally see the difference
okay,
between level polish.
just the wood and the lapping plate.
And with wood, it's a mirror polish.
Huh. That's cool. I sometimes have tried to do that with some of these junky chisels, try to get like a really fancy mirror polish on the back, but I'm somewhat successful with
My mirror
it.
polish disappears as soon as my hands start sweating.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like it's just a game in some regards when you're doing it.
One thing that I often keep in mind too is like, what's my ratio of sharpening time versus working time? So like how far, and you brought it up multiple times, like how far do I have to take it before I need to be back to work? And otherwise I'm just kind of wasting or I'm spending extra time for not much more time at the bench, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So like how long can I chop dovetails? How sharp do I need to get it that gives me that long length chop time without doing extra? Because that extra might get you a little bit longer, but it's very small margin.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and it's also if it takes a long time to go through whatever step you come up with, you'll be more reluctant when you are chopping those dovetails to stop and go sharpen, and that's where you're gonna. I think you have to think about it. It's like it's really just gonna take me, if I get the setup right, it won't take me long. It's gonna take me a minute or two to put a fresh edge on there, versus I mess up on the wood that I'm working on, and then I have to recut it. I got to start over. Like that time is worth a lot more. So it's a good reminder to stop, sharpen your tools, and
So if you know Shannon Rogers,
I don't think so.
he's a Renaissance woodworker on the internet. He does 100% hand tools.
Oh.
So what he says is that you should have a strap right on your bench. Do some dovetails, strap, do some more dovetails, strap. And he said he seldom goes back
To
to
sharpen.
the sharpening.
That's good advice.
Because it's he's always keeping.
And I often I will often, when I go back, not go through all the grits, like I would go back to the fine grit and then go back to work. Yeah, which is same kind of concept with
Just maintenance.
Yeah, it's maintenance.
and even with definitely you're not going back to the grinder every time, and even when your tool has radiused over, you don't need to go back to the grinder. And sometimes you don't even need to take the grinder all the way to the edge and turn a burr. If that edge is actually just dull, but there's not damage to it, you can grind right up to the edge and then get on your stones is another way to do it. Just if you've kind of, as you do this, eventually, I was trying to do it with the red lines, eventually you kind of wear away the hollow grind on there. So once you kind of get to a certain point, you might want to put another hollow grind on there just so you can keep working down the tool with that. That all, that's a lot to kind of digest if you haven't done it before, but we're gonna demo some stuff now. I'm just trying to think of what we'll start with. We start with this. This is, I keep a couple of these like beater chisels on the bench behind me for these projects where I'm just like scraping glue, or I think I was using some sort of stripper with this. Yeah, I don't do that, but I do abuse these all the time, so I thought these would be good. So we might start with, yeah, we'll just start by putting a name on it. So my New York City setup over here. Using the Tormek. This one is one they came out with at some point. I don't like this. But I think they quickly got rid of this model because it has some issues. So this Tormek has, my one teacher would call these like dangleometers. She was not very into weird things. Put your chisel on. But you want to put your bevel on, and then you just raise or lower it until you hit it, and you kind of have to. On this one, you have to kind of give it a little love when you're going down, going up. If you ever tune a guitar, you know, like tuning up is a little bit easier than tuning down on your peg. So you set that in. So now we know that that's 25 degrees. These stones are like the Japanese water stones, where you do have to have water. So the water cooled. It's a slow turning stone. It makes horrible noises. It's not the best build quality on this model. Versus this, which actually is a slow speed grinder, but spins at a much faster pace. And you can use Chris advocates just for getting a small, whatever's cheapest. You can even use the small wheels, is what he's saying, because you're not spending a lot of time there. And as long as you don't like fall asleep while you're working and stay in one place, you shouldn't glue the edge of your tool. And the way that he's grinding as well, he's not actually grinding all the way to the edge of the tool most of the time. So he's not turning a burr on the wheels. I typically do, just because that's what I've always done. For him, he's getting it almost to the edge, and then he's taking it, and when he's doing his honing process and putting that secondary bevel on there, he's just finishing the job by hand with the honing guides. So on this, I mean, we just get this thing running. There's a whole bunch of steps to flattening the stone, but really you're just putting a little bit of pressure. Yeah, I'll stop there. This machine has been through a little bit of trouble. I broke the clips, so there's a block of wood in there holding that water tray in place. But you're just putting a little bit of pressure on there and just moving it across the stone. Sometimes what I would do, and you can kind of see where it's grinding there. Sometimes if you are trying to do this without a gauge or something, you can use a Sharpie. I've already got this wet, so it's not going to stick, but you can put some Sharpie on there so you can, like if you're just touching it to a grinding stone, you can find out if you're actually in the middle of the bevel, if you know that bevel's already at the right angle. Or I guess you could use marking fluid if you had that. But yeah, so it's kind of the methodical part. You can, breathe, think about life as we go across. And really I'm just doing that every once in a while. I'm kind of checking to see if there's a burr on the edge, which we haven't talked about yet. Have people like sharpened scrapers where you're trying to put a burr on things, or Basically, anytime you work with abrading a piece of metal, eventually what's gonna end up happening is you get, I haven't done it yet. You get a little bit of a metal filing that comes off of the back edge that you can feel, and then once you feel that, you know that you've reached the edge of the tool. If you're trying to get out mistakes that are in that tool or a dent or something like that, you can also, I can start to feel that. Yeah, so that's got a burr on it, so we can just make sure, you pass that around. So that's really all that we're doing with the grinder. And actually on this grinder, it'll go even faster. The Tormac, I mean, it's also fast. As you work with wider tools, it's going to take a little bit longer. You got more material that you're grinding, so that will take a little bit longer. With smaller tools, like if you have an 1/8-inch chisel, you do need to be a little bit careful because there's less metal there that it's like a heat sink. So there's a little bit less metal. So it's just something to be conscious of, but you're not spending a week sitting here grinding, which is the whole point. And then, so in between each stage of the sharpening, we're basically raising a burr each time. Then that way we know we've kind of hit that mark, but then you need to remove the burr. So once we get that back, we'll take it and I just made this, mainly this was about trying not to get my bench wet. So it's just a bench cup. It's got a little piece of wood here, so when I push against it, it doesn't go anywhere. And then I can throw my stones in here pretty quickly and swap them out. Full honesty, as you see, one's really dark. Until last week, I only had one, and I would actually manually take the pieces out, but I thought since I was demoing, I'd try to make it look nice and look like I planned this. Which about 18 years ago, I think I did have a plan to have these all in their own holders, which it's finally come to fruition here. I've got them out of order. It's great. There we go. Yeah, so to remove the burr, all we're gonna do is just take that on the, and you yes, we can take this out now. Spray bottle. With these, you don't have to lubricate them all that much. You just need a little bit of water on them. You're really just taking it on the back there and removing that burr. It's not a whole long process. I talked a little bit about flattening the backs of these things. Just to do that, if it were like a new chisel that had a lot of problems, I might start on the more aggressive stone and work that until I can see that the front edge of it is flat. I think that the best point with flattening the backs of things is to not try to do it all at once. That's where I made mistakes when I first started out, is I was like, oh, I gotta get it flat, it's not gonna work proper, and it's gonna work. And then you're gonna keep sharpening, and every time you sharpen, if you have one that's stubborn, you just do a little bit more flattening of the back, and then the next time you come over, do a little more flattening of the back. Eventually it will get there. One caution on flattening the backs of chisels, which I also did not heed, it was something I'm better at reading sometimes than I am about doing. So I might read somebody and say, oh, when you're flattening the back of this, what you should do is take that chisel and knock the edges off. Because what you've just done, as you've done with pieces of wood too, like you're sanding something perfect and the edge of it becomes razor sharp. One of our categories here. And what ends up happening is I'm sitting there chopping mortises with the chisel in my hand. Not this chisel, but a nice chisel. And I'm chopping these mortises, and as the chisel is going up and down, I'm like, why is my hand red? And it's that the edges of the chisel, it's not that I've cut myself on the chisel point, it's that I've actually sharpened the edges of this chisel by flattening back and they turned a burr, and now that burr is cutting through my hand. So it's easy, and all you're doing is just hitting that edge, and that's really all it is. You're just breaking that edge so you're not cutting yourself. And that was one that I had to learn the hard way, as they say. Hopefully you didn't. Okay, so we've gotten a nice hollow grind on there. I brought a couple different gauges. I've since I spent the money on the Lee Nielsen one, now I use the Lee Nielsen one, but any of them will work. There's one that is here. This one I definitely don't recommend. That was the first one I had, and it drove me crazy. It was just fussy. I mean, I used it, but it was fussy. So that's where this thing came in, and this was the thing I found Lee Nielsen kind of doing a demo once of, so I just copied his. So this is now sharpened to 25 degrees, and I'm gonna basically put this on my 35, take the gauge, bump it up to the edge of the wood, and then just tighten it down. Sometimes I always over tighten things, but maybe I'll do that. I don't want it to slip. And then all you're doing is you're just coming to your honing stone and doing a couple passes here. Probably like in 5 passes, you should start to have a bit of an edge there, and I've turned a burr on that. And then normally I'll just leave it in the gauge. I'll keep my finger on it and just pull it backwards, and normally I've broken that burr. You know, move to the next one. You know, and another, so now I'm polishing, because these are the finer stones. One thing I didn't just do that you should technically do is, you can see there's metal filings on there that I'm touching. When you move from stone to stone, it's a good idea to wipe the blade. So you're not transferring, especially with more natural stones. So you're not transferring abrasives from stone to stone. If you think about, I didn't actually talk about natural stones, which when I was talking about abrasives, natural stones, one of the things about them is that they're natural. So all the abrasives in that stone are not always uniform. The more money you pay, generally, the more uniform the stone. But there's always some aggregates that are going to be a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. And you don't really want to be transferring them from stone to stone, because what you can do is kind of like how you have a chip in your plane blade and you start to get a line in there. You don't want to take a bigger grain, you know, that might maybe a little diamond pops off to here, and you don't want it to be sitting on this stone. So you can just kind of wipe it down in between. This is the one that I use for the final polishing, which is, see, it still doesn't work. They still get in the way. The problem with that one, the Lee Nielsen one, is that the stones were just in the way. You know, you want to sharpen something, or you want to take the burr off, and it's like there's no place for the chisel to go there. So I was instantly frustrated with that design. And I kept popping the stones out because of that. Yeah, so that's, I don't know how long that took. I think a lot longer because of Gavin, but that's really it. Sometimes
There is a PDF on the Lee Nielsen site that has the jig, and I just made the bottom heart.
Yeah,
Not the holder, just and he gives you all the Deneb, who is the guy who does your video on the sharpening. And he's labeled them all with the dimensions, how far the blade has to stick out from the jig.
My setup over there, I just stair step them.
Yeah.
So each stone is 2 inches taller than the other one. So that way you can hang off the side and you're hanging over
okay.
under that leather cover over there. I found that to work, at least for what I'm doing, just to make the blocks under each block a different height.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's one of the things, depending on what you're sharpening too, like I think Drew Langster used to, he had a big block like it was like up to here, because he was sharpening draw knives on it, to be able to have the handles to go down.
What are your DMT stones mounted to?
This is just a piece of oak.
Okay.
It's actually a shelf template from my medicine cabinet that I made a long time ago. That I think I must have cut this wrong. So it's just craft wood that was laying around the shop. They're a little bit loose, but as you get it wet, they expand and then they hold the stones a little tighter. The one last part of this that I wanted to talk about, because this is the part that I'm still learning about. Some of you may have this down. But on plane blades, the one difference here is that when you use a plane blade and you're trying to smooth out a big piece of wood, if you sharpen this the way that I just did, what ends up happening is you end up with track marks. Every time you take a swipe with that blade and that blade goes across, it kind of cuts into the wood and you get a little line. So what you want to do with like a jack plane or smoothing plane is start to radius the edges of that, which frightened me at first, because I'm like, I know how to make things perfectly square. I don't know how to do this like curvy thing. And then I mean, this is out of Chris's book, what he was showing. But we'll show that real quick too. Am I okay time-wise?
Nope.
Okay. So I think on this one, what I'll do is this one's like so rounded over. So let's plug this guy in. And this also is one of those things that it feels wrong to do. Because you're like, I'm blunting my tool. So hopefully this isn't shooting at anybody. But so this one's been rounded over on the back side, and you can feel the radius on that thing. So all and I set up this gauge so it's like perpendicular to my wheel. All I'm going to do is go in here and just actually I want to be able to see it. And I'm referencing with my finger on the guide. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just trying to get that round over on the back side out of there. So that's all I need to do there. And then, I mean, the process is exactly the same right now. It'll come into when we go to hone that we deal with the curve. We'll take that. This guy.
If it makes you feel better, that felt wrong over here too.
It felt right. The first time I did it, I'm like, what am I doing? I'm ruining the tool. Sorry, I've got ahead of myself because I'm talking. Go to the Tormac. You can kind of play with this too. Sometimes I will adjust the blade and kind of just look to see if it's close. Then I'll get the dangleometer piece and dangle. She had the one that I think that you have. That was like has the long dangly bit on the protractor. Oh, that was the dangleometer. But now I just call anything that seems to see a dangleometer.
I'm gonna stop that phrase. There's a lot of gauges out there that it just feels like, okay, I could have just guessed.
Yeah. She also had my favorite saying, which was, there's only two types of tools. There's tools of precision and tools of persuasion. Which I thought was brilliant. It's like, okay. Now it's Sylvia Rosenthal. She does these beautiful, almost like wood sculpture. Kind of blending woodworking and sculpture. So right now what we're doing is we're getting our hollow grind back on there. it'll take a little bit longer than the other one, it's a wider blade. And we're removing a lot more material because it's blunt at the end of the thing. And I don't actually know that when this thing was ever sharpened. One thing that you can see too, and I'm starting to see it, you'll start to see in the water on the filings coming up, and you may even be able to see the burr. Yoga Sunquist, when he freehands his knife sharpening on the Tormac, and the way he was showing me, he looks at the way the water is flowing over the metal. I never got it, but that is like what he's looking at, not the actual tool, but the way that the water moves around that blade edge. And actually, this is the wrong type of plane blade to show this on, because this is a block plane where you don't really want any radiusing edges, but we will show it on this nonetheless. Yeah, this is like late night in the shop, like I do every once in a while kind of go through them, have a sharpening party, but I think really you should be doing it more often as you're working, but I'm not the best about stopping myself. I end up breaking something, then I'm like, okay, so that's now got a burr on it. So we brought that back to life. Now we're going to destroy it again by sharpening it incorrectly for what we're doing. So that'll be it. Okay, so now we're getting to putting the radius on the edge, and you may also want to do this for scrub planes. For a scrub plane, though, it's a more aggressive curve on there. If you're familiar with like a scrub plane, you're removing a lot of stock. So for that, you may actually draw a radius on here and take that out with the grinder before you do any of this. So we're going to still set this to 35. So I think this needs a bench hook too, because now that the stones aren't there, it pushes. So we got that, and the diagram here. So the idea here is that you're dividing. This gets a little complicated. I don't use that many steps, but the idea is that the tool has a center wheel here, so it can actually rock a little bit back and forth. And I think some people say like you're putting English on it. But you're basically pressing harder on one side as you're doing it, and you're doing more strokes on one side. So when you start out, I tried to label it like it's like 12 strokes on the one edge, then you do 12 strokes on the other edge, then you come back into the middle and you're doing 6, you're kind of halving it, and then in the middle, in the very fine middle, you're doing less. And the way that you're doing that is with your fingers. You're pushing a little bit more. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 7, 11. It dawns on me that maybe the backstroke counts as well, but so I think that's good. And you can just see you're putting your fingers in different places and kind of rocking a little bit. You come in the middle. And again, I am learning this part right now, so it's not the best. And actually, I can already see that I've kind of gotten a little more curve on that side than I do on the other side. And the other way to check it is to kind of hold it up to light. You could do it with a metal edge, but then obviously you could be dulling your sharpening tools. So doing a piece of wood is good. So this, I know I need to go a little further with it, especially in this side. A lot, we may want to. Switch over here. You have a burr on that, so that's good. But, yeah, let me just check that. And then you're doing the same thing on as you go up and the stones, so you can pass that around. Looks mildly presentable. But that's the part that I'm kind of learning right now is just how to get that, because I've always struggled with having these track marks and things. And it's annoyed me to the point where I'm like, I need to learn how to sharpen this properly, so I don't have those marks. And that's the basics of
I
that.
have a sense of how much curve you need to avoid the crack wall.
It's not much. Yeah, from what I've heard, I don't have good firsthand experience with this, but when you're putting the blade up, you want to see a little bit of light on each corner. But you don't want to remove so much that you basically have a scrub
So
point.
I watched the person do what they're doing,
Uh-huh.
but he only did the camera part at the very end.
Oh, really?
So he went through all the grits, and the final grit, that's where he.
Well, I gotta try that
I
too.
actually only do my corner, that's
So you
it.
just do the corners.
I sharpen the whole plane blade, like I use a number 2 for most of my just daily bench work. And I just sharpen it and then I just go on the corner and I just do 2 or 3 strokes, 2 or 3 strokes.
If you're doing it by hand when you do it, so are you just kind of
No guy, just
Yeah.
put a little bit heavy pressure on that corner and
Yeah.
do it.
and just taking the corner off?
Yep, just taking the corner down, keeping my bevel.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so still at whatever my bevel is, but I'm just putting some heavy pressure on that corner, a couple strokes, heavy pressure on that corner, a couple strokes.
Okay. And you're doing that on the finest stuff?
Oh, no, I mean, I'll do that on probably the second finest thing.
Okay.
So what this guy was doing was, he did the 2 outside corners.
Mhm.
And then he do kind of, if you divide the blade in bits, the 2 outside bits and the 2 middle bits,
Mhm.
and then the middle one.
Yeah,
A few strokes on each.
I need to try that because I assumed, and I may have assumed wrong to do it on the more aggressive, because I was, oh, I need to take off more material. So maybe I just need to try it on the
On a jack plane. maybe.
where it's a thicker blade.
Well, and you're taking much heavier cuts. So if you think like geometry wise, when the blade's intersecting with the wood, the deeper the cut, the more relief you have to pull that back. to make it
I see.
attractive.
That makes some sense. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that part of it.
Yeah, so the deeper the cut, the more camber that you need, yeah. But a smoothing plane, when you're just trying to whip it off.
well,
Yeah.
Right, it's kind of like going from a stroke plane to a jack plane to a smoothing plane. You go into a big camber, smaller camber, even smaller camber.
yeah, so that was all I had, unless there's questions. Conversation, I mean, it's cool having the conversation, because I think the thing about sharpening and why I was a little bit. There's a little bit of trepidation going into it, because there's so many different ways to do it, and everyone has a way that they like to do it. And the thing about it is, as long as you're getting results that you're happy with, and you're not struggling with your tools, you got a good way of doing it. So I'm trying to show you, these are kind of like my process and how I've gotten to that process. And the road that led me to it, just because of where I happen to be living and situations.
There's as many opinions and methods of sharpening as there is how to comb your hair.
Yeah.
Mike Taylor was trying to convince me the other day to just put a sanding flat disc on the drill press and sharpen everything that way.
I've seen that one. Yeah, that's a new thing that somebody came up with.
Yeah, Mike Taylor with Taylor Tools.
Oh, that who
Yeah,
made that thing?
Yeah, that's how he did everything.
Yeah, they have a cool thing where they've taken a block of wood at an angle.
Yeah.
And they've put you put your chisel on it, and then they have a drill press with a flat disc on it, and basically it's just, that's your angle, right? I mean, this isn't 25
Whatever the
degrees.
block is, yeah.
Yeah, and then you're basically just touching it up. I mean, it's just a different way of grinding a tool.
Yeah.
They're all doing the same thing.
There is a tool workshop.
Oh, yeah,
Which
that
is-
one, yep. Yeah, so, I mean, sander, there's all sorts of ways you could create the same thing, but the idea is to try to get two planes that meet. It's geometry class, so you have a sharp point at the end.
I will say though, if you're gonna start out and you're gonna buy a jig, buy the Lee Nielsen. Don't buy the Eclipse, which is the $30 one is the
This
Eclipse.
thing,
Yeah,
yeah,
because it's not flat and you gotta tune it up. But
Yeah.
the Lee Nielsen, although it's over $100, it's definitely worth the difference.
I've been very happy with it.
Like some.
Yeah. And it's got, this one has like different add-ons too, for, it is, the angles on it are actually manufactured for Lee Nielsen tools, so there's some tools, and I can't remember which, they have, and maybe like my mortise chisels or something that don't quite fit in the jaws well, but they have different jaws and you can swap out.
Mortise draws.
Yeah, and then make a jaw for,
Yeah.
their,
And
So
they want some longer
yeah,
draws.
Yeah.
that's.
Thank
that's
you.
all. Hopefully I wasn't moving out too much, Oh, you should put some oil on your tools as well, just so they don't rust, especially if you're in a very humid environment. I think that was the last thing I had.
Yeah, right after sharpening.
Yeah.
Polishing.
I immediately start to rust. And some people, I've heard like have like a special rag that they have in like a Ziploc bag that they keep oiled and do that. I have a lot of rags around my shop, so you know, I think I bought a box of these like a long time ago and I've had them for 10 years that I've been in the house I've been in. Cause I just use them for this and they're normally hanging around the ceiling on clothespins. But I think that this stuff doesn't combust like the if you use like an oil that's